What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report. Black Masculinist News. Hope everybody is well. I don't know what it is. That is the trailer for the new Doogie Howser remake, with Doogie now being a Hawaiian girl. Right? I'm understanding that there's also supposed to be a Black Wonder Years, and just so we're clear, I'm not really looking forward to that either. Just make a new damn character. But the reason I played this is because in many ways, and I didn't even play it because of the Asian dynamic. It was simply the gesture that you guys know I've been accounting for quite a while now. And we'll get to that in a moment. You know, earlier today, I was flipping channels and I ran across Crocodile Dundee. And it was the first one, right? There's a scene where he's having this discussion with the primary white woman in the movie, you know, journalist. She comes to Australia to interview him, and he kind of jibes her about not being able to get through the outback without him. And she picks up a gun, shoots it at the ground at him, and, you know, tries to prove as a feminist she doesn't need him. Of course, a few minutes later, she's attacked by a crocodile, and he has to save her. And I thought about that scene that I've seen a million times. And I realized you couldn't make that movie, or really, I don't care about the movie, but you couldn't make that kind of a scene today. Well, what kind of scene do I mean? You can't make a scene where women are in need of help, particularly from men. You can't make a scene where you see men demonstrate a skill that women don't have. Right? You can't make that kind of film today because the narratives that we have don't allow for it. But again, we'll get there in a second. I thought, you know, for a second, one, since I'm operating on very little sleep, I stayed up last night and built a cabinet. So I just didn't go back to sleep, didn't sleep. So I'm just a little up and I'm a little buzzed. So I'm a little bit in a reflective mood. Forgive me. But somebody asked me why I did this, why I do this. I said, you know, let me clarify a few things. I don't know if it'll make it any clearer for anybody, but it is what it is. You know, if I have to say it, and I don't know why I should have to, it's stupid. No, I don't hate women. I'm not trying to promote the hatred of women. I don't even understand why you're asking that question, or why some do. No, not at all why I'm doing this. No, I'm not doing this because somebody broke my heart and I'm trying to get back at women for it. No. I, like any other, you know, American man, yes, I've had my heart broke. I mean, Richard Pryor said it best. You ain't a man until you've had your heart broke. So going back to high school, you know, junior high, yes, I've had those experiences. In the contemporary moment, I've had good and bad experiences with women. It's not about individual women. It's not about getting back at somebody. For me, it's a couple things connected. It's the culture we have now, both in media, but in terms of policy as well. And it's a culture that rests on the sacrifice of men while we are completely oblivious to that sacrifice. Even in the Black community, it is a culture that celebrates the advancement of women, often at the expense of men and boys, with no acknowledgement of men and boys. Now, one would ask, you know, because I've had this question come up, well, why don't you talk about the men? Why don't you chastise the men? Look, there are plenty of other places that do that. My little tiny YouTube channel, that's not the direction I go. Why? Because men don't need critique? No. Black men especially, everybody needs critique to some extent, but Black men get plenty of it. For the last 50 years, I grew up in a context where Black men got nothing but critique, more critique than praise, as a matter of fact. And even on YouTube, there are plenty of brothers who are part of the, you know, manosphere, whatnot, that critique Black men as well. Matter of fact, there are many times where they'll jump on black men before anybody else. So the way I approach my channel and my content is I try to focus on the culture and the environment as it pertains to misandry and female superiority. And we'll go into examples of that in a minute, right? So that's why I do that. Because as far as the critique is concerned, the criticism of black men and men in general is rampant on both sides of the aisle. I don't really think I need to contribute to that, especially because I don't believe that people have a strong enough grasp on the depths of male and black male, especially vulnerability. I talk about vulnerability because it's dismissed and overlooked, in my opinion. But the critiques are abound everywhere, so that's one of the reasons I don't do that. I choose to deal with the depths of vulnerability because it's most ignored, even in terms of the data we have, which is why I cover, the information I do. And I think also that there's a serious danger in the kind of programming we do. This is why when it comes to films, I do kind of really a meta narrative critique. What does that mean? It's not as much about each individual film, because you can get that anywhere. Everybody does film critiques and film reviews. I mean, it is what it is. And there's a place for that. I'm not dismissing that. But just like I'm going to do with Shang Chi, it's not as much about Shang Chi, the individual film, as it is the connecting fibers between Shang Chi and 100 other films that have come out in the last number of years. That's what I focus on, because I think the type of programming that we're getting is dangerous. I think it's detrimental, especially for boys who are basically taught with this meta narrative, this narrative that connects, many different media projects in the West. This narrative that relies on misandry. It relies on the underdevelopment of boys. It relies on men and boys falling on their sword to pay homage and worship to female superiority, with no regard for what the impact of that'll be on a generation, or the last few, in fact, of boys. I don't think we care. And I don't think we connect boys' behavior with the type of programming that's been coming out this last few decades. And that's why I focus on it. So I just wanted to get some things clear. Like it or not, you don't have to like it, but I'm just explaining this is where I'm coming from. So no, it's not about getting back at women. I'm not angry at women. I'm not trying to get, I don't know, this is ridiculous. It's really about acknowledging what I don't think has been paid enough attention to. And you're speaking to, or you're listening to, I should say, a father of a son. And I'm particularly sensitive to what resources I did and did not have raising him in a society that overlooks black boys. Black boys are the pavement of the road society travels on, or is, for that matter. And for the most part, I think it needs to be called out. And we need to understand their vulnerability, especially because many of them can't articulate it. They've not been taught how, and they don't have a vocabulary, or at least we're developing one. So that said, I went to see Shang-Chi the other night. And let me get the likes out the way, because it's not going to be an in-depth review like I did on Respect and a number of other films over the years. This is just going to be a quick hit, because I'm not really focusing on Asian culture. That's not my training. I'm focusing on the masculinity piece, but that's about it. But as far as the film, first of all, let me say I've been a marginal Shang-Chi fan over the years. I've been reading comics for over 40 years. I've run into a couple of his books. Wasn't bad. I wasn't a raving fan, but I didn't dislike him either. The Mandarin, as a Tony Stark villain, I thought he was interesting. So there were some narratives, some things in this film I was drawn to just out of curiosity to see where Disney would take them from the last time I remember reading them, so that was interesting. I mean, the last time I was really reading the Mandarin, I was in high school. So, I wanted to see what changes they made, but I'll say straight out, some of the things I like, just to be clear, I like the comedy. I did. I enjoyed the film's comedy. I enjoyed some of the relationships between the characters. Let me see. I thought the performance of the title character was he was good. He could balance humor and seriousness pretty well. So I enjoyed that. I liked the fight choreography. That was tight. I like the multi-dimensional explanation for where magic comes from, because the MCU has been pretty strict early on about magic not really existing, and when we finally see it in Camotage with the Doctor Strange, it's mainly because it's not fully explained, but for the most part, we get the Eye of Agamotto, which is basically an Infinity Stone. So it's not super cut clear, but at least you get some explanations. And by the time you get to Doctor Strange, we have years of where no magic exists. So at least as it pertains to Shang Chi, I guess, which is the proper pronunciation, most of the magic comes from this dragon in another dimension. So you get that. And, I appreciate that they're at least trying to be somewhat consistent. And it's difficult to do across this many films. Right? And I have serious criticisms of the MCU, but as somebody who went from Christopher Reeve Superman in the late 70s to Batman in the late 80s and waiting for these types of films, I'm finally glad that they're making them. So I appreciate certain things, and I'm probably less critical than I should be because of that nostalgic waiting, that they had us do. So I appreciate the consistency that they're trying to have while expanding the universe and making way for characters that they couldn't introduce earlier on using the rules that they established early in Marvel, right? But you kind of knew they were going to do it because we've been hearing about the 10 rings since the very first movie. So we knew, if you knew anything about comics, you knew the 10 rings points to the Mandarin, right? I should say, I actually liked the correction of the concept of the Mandarin that takes place in the film. They kind of challenged the racist origins of this, which was going to happen. Hold on. Yeah, it was going to happen. There was no way it wasn't. Especially by the time you had that whole dust up a few years ago with the Ancient One and Doctor Strange going from an Asian elder to a Celtic woman, and Marvel's, desire to kind of move away from racist stereotypes of Asians. So you knew that if they were going to introduce Shang-Chi, they had to do a lot of cleaning up, and they did, in one way, shape, or form. I won't say a lot, but they did enough to acknowledge the legacy of the character in Marvel history has been somewhat racist, and they tried to clean it up. So that being said, Zhu Wenwu, who is technically the Mandarin, corrects that early, fairly, into the film at a good pace, where he talks about the racist origins of it and how it's problematic. And so I thought that was interesting that they went that far. So I appreciated that. I appreciated the depiction of him, not just as a one-dimensional despot who's out to control the world, but actually as a man, I don't want to say multi-dimensional, but he has layers to him, right? He's nuanced, right? He's in one vein a power-hungry, despot, but in another vein a loving father who doesn't know how to deal with the death of his wife and takes it out on his children in a very ugly, human way, not in an inhuman, monstrous way, but in a very ugly human way. He deals with the pain of the loss of his life, with reattaching himself to this desire he had for over 1,000 years to acquire power. In many ways, as a deflection from dealing with that pain, blames his children, so on and so on. And like I said, so all of that, I actually dug that because those were very human stories. I like the complexity of those things. I like that he didn't have to be so ugly as a human being that there never was any love for anybody and he just did everything just for power. I like that he actually stops trying to acquire power. He gives up the 10 rings to live this life. And his past catches up with him in the sense that his enemies kill his wife and he picks up the 10 rings again. Now the 10 rings, they don't say how he quite acquires it, but they do tell us it's kept him alive for over 1,000 years. And he's, almost dominated the globe using these things. So, and I like the depiction of the rings as bracelets that coordinate with one another. They're kind of one-dimensional, but I don't know if that's the way he's using them or the way Marvel's writing them. In the books, each of the rings were finger rings, and they each had a specific power, kind of like the Infinity Stones. I don't know if they're going to go with that later in other films. I don't know if they're going to say it's just because the way Wenwu used them, or if they're going to actually say, this is all the Ten Rings do. But they hint at the fact that the Ten Rings actually are much older than they thought. And so that leaves us with a sense that there's more to be explored there. What else? Let me see. I think on the likes, that might have been the majority of it. I like the CG effects, that was cool. I actually liked the one white character they had, played by Florian Montaño, Razor Fist, who's the same guy that plays the antagonist in Creed 2. He plays Drago's son. He was actually hilarious in this to me, and it wasn't as much about what he did, but how the film, kind of wrote him. So there's this period where they actually, steal his car at a certain point. It's actually kind of hilarious because you see the type of car related to the character we saw, and you wouldn't necessarily assume that. So I like those kind of things. I like the exploration of Chinese culture in America and in China, and even in this other dimension they go to, right? I like those things. I just want to put those things out. It's not a horrible movie. I'm not saying don't go see it. I'm just, kind of letting you know my impressions. Now, in many ways, this reminded me of Black Panther, right? Because in Black Panther, if you read the comics for years, the Dora Milaje were really not much more than, kind of like the president's private guard. And all of a sudden, they become the military and all this other stuff, And again, we jump onto this trope of female superiority that runs pretty heavy in Black Panther. And everybody's speculating on the next level of it, even though I think it was going to happen anyway with Chadwick Boseman's passing. I think we're going to see it that much more. And people say, well, just, it's not sexist that, Shuri's going to be the Panther. It happened in the comics. Well, I had problems with it then. Because I think that was they tried to, that was a preemptive direction Marvel was going into that anticipated the MCU, especially by the time they brought on, what is his name? Damn, his name escapes me at the moment. My apology. I wasn't even planning to talk about him, but he's been writing in Marvels for the last few years. He switched from Panther to Captain America. You guys know who he is. Anyway, forgive me. His name escapes me, but for you real comic heads, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so let me get to it. So my main thing, as you guys know, is I tend to chronicle these narratives of female superiority. And when it comes to Shang Chi, you're going to get a lot of it. Now, I understand that they're marketing to a female audience. I understand they're trying to tap into these dollars because the data shows us that women tend to spend more. They consume more media and they spend more disposable cash on products marketed while, ingesting this media. I get it. I know Marvel's really trying to double down on that and tap into a new dollar from their comics to their films. I get it. Still, again, I'm looking at the impact this has on boys and men. And I think this is a huge problem, not just in Shang-Chi, across the board. So how does Shang-Chi contribute to this? Well, first and foremost, going back to Wenwu, who is Shang-Chi's father. He's the despot that has the 10 rings for a good 1,000 years before Shang is born. I keep saying Shang because that's how we grew up saying it, reading the comics. I didn't have anyone there to correct it. It's kind of like when I used to call Thor's hammer Mjolnir because I didn't exactly, have any kind of guides there on how to properly pronunciate these things. So Shang, his father's been around 1,000 years before he was born. And he's pretty much on his way to taking over the world. And he tries to find this multi-dimensional or other dimensional village that's being guarded by the woman that would become his wife. And she promptly kicks his ass. Now, yet again, I get the marketing thing, but all right. So I can't remember the last film I've seen where a male actually beats a female at anything. And that's partly why this stuff annoys me, because it's becoming so predictable. When the scene first started and it became clear they were going to have a little confrontation, I already knew it was going to happen. I called it out before it did. And of course, she promptly kicks his ass. Then they fall in love. She leaves. They get married. They have kids. Okay. So later in the film, Shang Li, and I'm not doing a full review. I'm just giving you my impressions on key elements of it. So he comes back to China after leaving when his father has raised him to be an assassin, trained him in hard style, and sends him after the killer of his mother. So instead, he runs away, eventually ends up in San Francisco, where he hangs out with his best friend, Katie. And they're doing their thing, just being young in the Bay Area, having fun. Lives in a little shack, parks cars for a living. That's it. By the time he's kind of tricked back into going to China and meets up with the sister that he kind of abandoned, she's all kinds of pissed at him. And, she set up this whole martial arts industry, this MMA kind of thing that she runs and, makes money off of. I ain't mad at that. It is what it is. But when he gets there, they set up a fight between, she sets up a fight between herself and Shang, and she promptly kicks his ass too. So these kind of films, I used to wonder. I used to wonder this back when I watched Daredevil with Ben Affleck. Where he gets predictably he gets beat up by his love interest in that one. Sorry, too many things going on in here. Jeez, come on now. All right. Trying to remember. I don't remember what year this film came out in, but 2003. Okay, so yeah, 2003. Ugh, man, that's when you definitely find out you're getting old. So yeah, I remember watching this film back then, and they used to do this a lot. So the character in that one was Elektra, right? Elektra was the love interest, and they would do these things where they would, have these kind of battles, between male and female characters to prove that the females were equal to the males. Except, I remember when I watched Daredevil, one of the things that got me was it was more than them being equal. She actually beat him. And I remember thinking, what exactly is the point? So sure enough, Shang-Chi fights his sister, and she beats him, just like his mother beat his father. And it's not only a statement about women, especially individual characters, being dominant over male characters. It was also in this film a statement about femininity and masculinity as expressed in the martial arts. You had the hard style and you had this kind of soft flowing style, right? Now the underlying theme was supposed to be that Shang would become his best when he could balance both styles. And by the way, he gets his ass kicked by his aunt too. So at every turn, whenever the men had to confront the women, they always got their asses kicked. There was even a moment where Awkwafina, the comedian, her character Katie, she's literally had one day of bow training, right? And she's able to make the big shot at the end. And the guy who's training her, played by Yin, he just dies, and so she survives, and with her one day of training. So there are a couple of these things that got me, right? So femininity as expressed in soft style is supposed to be better than, as opposed to its balance. And the reason I say better than is because there isn't a balance between the two. Constantly this, feminine flowing style always wins, just like the women always win. It's a very route, predictable approach. It doesn't show balance. It actually shows an imbalance where it is, again, we start to hear these narratives of female superiority. That's what I have a problem with. And again, I'm a father of a son who's almost into adulthood. I've watched for years the type of programming he's had available to him. And when your son can look you in the eye and tell you they've never actually seen a boy beat a girl at anything, intellectual, physical, whatever, in any of the programming they watch, that's an issue for me. That's an issue for me. And this film, again, falls in line with all of that. It's not only given females in the script who are better than the given males in the script, it's femininity that's better than masculinity. This does not portray balance. It portrays an imbalance. And it actually holds men of color, especially when you start talking about Asian men, black men, because again, this is very reminiscent of Black Panther. I saw very similar tropes in that film as well, right? When you look at both of them together, it holds men of color as somehow responsible for this patriarchal, narrative that we've been hearing about in Western feminism for the last few decades. And yet, as we go back to Tommy Curry's The Man Not, he shows us black men do not aspire to be white men. They don't seek to dominate black women, and they don't have the instruments or institutions to do so. They don't. Our community is not run by men. And yet these narratives that somehow women have to fight the patriarchy as reflected in the white world across all of these non-white spaces seems to hold true, especially for these filmmakers. And it in and of itself, I find highly problematic, right? So those are the kind of things that got to me. Like I said, I did appreciate the father not being completely representative of just this solely masculine tradition that seems to have no heart. They actually represent him as having had heart and being aware of the value of different elements of Chinese culture. I thought that was interesting. They have a conversation at the table and he starts to talk about the importance of, the actual Chinese names and what they meant. I appreciated those subtle nuances. I did. I liked how they kind of mixed that up a little bit and they gave us other dimensions to them other than what we've seen, right? But the female superiority thing to me disrupts the story and it undermines, especially boys, who, by the way, many were for many years the primary target of these audiences. So the fact that needs to be opened up, I'm not losing any sleep about, but it doesn't have to be at the expense of boys. It really doesn't. So I'll give you an example. I think her name is Xiaoling, but Shang Li's sister, right? She beats him up. I told you about that. But when she explains where she got her skill from, you got to understand, he spent years being trained hard by his father and all the men that worked for his father, all the trainers that worked for his father. You can see some of this in the trailer, even if you haven't seen the film. They're beating his ribs with sticks. They're beating him down until he's hardened, until he gets better. And it's a slow climb to improve his style. Now, this takes me back to the Star Wars trilogy, or a series of trilogies, right? When you watch Luke gets his ass whooped. When you look at all of the Jedi, you go back to the Jedi Temple with Anakin, they are getting their asses kicked until they get better and better and better. And then when you get to Rey, she just wakes up one day, hears about the Force, and a couple hours later, she's beating trained Force users like it's, like they stole something. Well, it's something very similar here with Shang Li's sister. She says, since, she's a woman, nobody would train her, so she's kind of pointing to this sexist tradition in Chinese culture, that she had to teach herself by watching. Now, look, I've been studying martial arts on and off since I was like 18, and I can tell you, you can stand outside and watch all you want. Matter of fact, I even used to ask, guys who had their own dojos, I'd be like, well, why do you guys got these big windows in front? I mean, why would anybody want to pay for this if they can just stand outside and watch? And they would always laugh at me. They'd be like, look, if that's all it was, yeah, we would close the doors and only people that paid could be in here. But they would all tell me, you can watch all you want. You ain't getting this until you get somebody that shows you where to move your hips, how to position your feet, where to put your elbow, how to move your weight. In what way? I mean, these real subtle things make the difference in ways that I can't explain to you until you've been there. And then the other part is when you're taught various, I don't care if it's standing style, grappling, whatever it is, when you're taught a martial art, one of the things that you're taught is how it feels to have what you want to implement on others implemented on you. You need to know how it hurts. You need to know how it feels. You need to know when it hurts. You need to know, those kind of subtleties. You have to experience it. So when a teacher teaches you, they do it on you, you learn it, and they do it a few times, and then you practice it and you practice it and you practice it. Well, the other reason you practice experiencing it as well is when you know when it hurts and how it hurts, you also eventually get taught the escape or the counter to it, so on and so forth. But my point in this is that in terms of martial training, it is not something you can do by watching. So for her to stand on the side and say, I watched, and then years later she's kicking Shang Li, But again, this is what I'm talking about. And what I think it promotes on a very subtle level, when you see it represented hundreds of times over and over, especially if you're an avid TV or YouTube or film watcher, you're getting dozens of examples per day, in its most extreme. What does it begin to reinforce over time? Right? This idea that women are not only, when I talk about female superiority, it can be physical, it can be intellectual or mental, it can be, it can also be even kind of spiritual. When you start to talk about the inborn value of a human being, where women are just inherently better because they're women. I have issues with that. Because when you tack that onto the tradition of hyper villainizing black males from boyhood to adulthood, and then you tap on top of that this tradition that women are inherently better, there's not really a moment where the humanity of black boys and men is able to really kind of pierce through. And by humanity, not just the failures, not just the mistakes, not just the behavior that's problematic, but also the beauty, the wisdom, the sacrifice. And there are even different types of sacrifice. The kind of chivalrous sacrifice that men are expected to make, that we're taught in this culture, is to fall on our swords simply because. That's not what sacrifice is to me. I'm talking about, look, I have had sages my age, some of whom may have been younger, right? All the way to older than me, that represent this wisdom tradition among men. And just as much as among men, they represent it in terms of the masculine tradition. I've had everything from hard-style martial arts teachers to spiritual masters who were hard and disciplined. But that hardness, if you only saw it from a distance, that's what it appeared to be. When you got to know them, that hardness wasn't as hard as you thought. It was just a part of the experience. But you find that it was usually in touch with a very deep reservoir of love and care. And that wisdom tradition, that masculine tradition, is not seen. It's dismissed to too great a degree, in my humble opinion. And I've seen these masters, again, across age, across class, across geography, across, you name it, skin tone, size, height, you know what I mean? And I'm just talking about this masculine tradition because we're not seeing it, especially as it pertains to black men. This is why when I do my live Onyx Report show every week, I tend to have what I call the hashtag sacred black masculine moment, where I appreciate the contributions, sacrifices, or, goings ons of various black men. The reason I do that is because those are the things we don't get to see. And I think they're important. The accomplishments, despite the resistance. But overall, I'm trying to advocate for the humanity of black men and boys. And I advocate for that humanity not only because I myself am one, or because I'm a father, but also because I've seen so many beautiful examples of that. From coaches to teachers to martial art teachers to spiritual masters, I've seen it in so many different spaces. Even my students, watching my students learn, watching them teach each other, I have seen masculine examples that just don't have any address in popular media. And so I'm not here to say, okay, the Hollywood tradition or the media tradition is women good, men are bad. No. It's the opposite. Men are good, women are bad. That's not what I'm here to say. What I'm here to say is that you have examples of women good, men bad everywhere. What I'm here to say is there's been a very orchestrated practice of undermining men and boys on multiple levels in society for decades, particularly in the black community. And all I'm saying is black men have dimensions to them. And the tradition of black men that I value, I have very rarely seen on screen. Very rarely. And I'd like to see more of it. And it's probably going to have to come from black men themselves. So I am also participating in a practice of black men making their own content. It's another reason why I'm here. I started off writing a blog I didn't have to do that. I could have just stayed writing the blog. I didn't have to come to YouTube. I came to YouTube because I too agree that we have to make our own content. So I'm making my contribution to that. But I'm not saying this as somebody who's suggesting that we, critique women at every turn because I hate women. Nah. I was with my wife for 11 years. Loved her to death. Almost had a daughter. Just the very idea of that I love. And I have, of course, women, family members and friends, so on and so forth. My issue is not about attacking women, but I am attacking this culture that tells me these boys and these men are less than human, and that I need to accept that if I am to be a good man or a good intellectual or a good scholar and professor. I need to accept these misandrous tropes and then reenact them in my own work in order to be acceptable. I won't do it because it's not true. But I also don't believe women are all bad either. It's not about that. What I am arguing, however, is yes, there are certain cultural practices in society as a whole, but also in the Black community that contribute to this misandry a great deal and have separated families. But I don't argue that this is something women just woke up one day and decided to enact, or men decided to participate in. Some men. No, these are things that I think were imposed from outside to varying degrees. We can take it back to the 1700s. We can take it back to the 1960s. Different layers of it that affect human behavior, dynamics, and relationships. I think those are the causes of many of these problems. And what I'm pointing out to you in films like this are the current day versions of that continue to promote confusion and disarray within communities. Now, I'm not talking about this film as an Asian who's watching this. I'm talking about this as somebody in Western culture who's seeing the same meta tropes, meta narratives that are playing out in other films that really heavily invest in male inferiority. So whether you're talking about the bumbling fathers that are idiots in sitcoms and cartoon shows, from The Simpsons to Married with Children to The Family Guy, or whether you're talking about the barbarous despots that, oppress everybody and kill and rape women, whatever the depictions are of men that continue to show us to be nothing more than these toxic beings, this is what I have a problem with. And as much as I can find elements of Shang Chi enjoyable, I don't think you need to have men. I don't think in order to highlight women's capacities, it needs to be at the expense of men. Just highlight them. Just show them. That's it. Anyway, hope you guys are well. Hope you enjoyed. Still a little buzzed, so I may have missed a few things I wanted to talk about. I hope I was somewhat clear, but y'all have a good one. See you soon. Peace.